Hello. Today I'm going to go over how SlideRule Analytics processes data. In particular, we're going to review how SlideRule Analytics processes server-side data. So how the data flows from actions that your users take, that your customers take on your website, and how those result in where the data flows into SlideRule Analytics servers, Shopify servers, and how they eventually cash out as Google Analytics events. In particular, we're going to focus on how we handle customer personally identifiable information, how long it's stored, things like that. Great, cool. So let's jump in. Over here, I have delineated in this chart the data and events that take place on the browser, uh, in Shopify, on SlideRule Analytics servers, in cache that we use to store data. So that's the SlideRule Analytics cache. And just for reference, how those eventually result in Google Analytics events down here as well. Okay, so to start with, I just want to say we do not sell any customer data. So we do store some customer data for processing and sending it over to Google Analytics. You can see our data retention windows here. We're going to dive into some of those details about when that data is removed and things like that. But we don't sell any customer information to third parties. Obviously, we don't share any personally identifiable information with Google Analytics because it doesn't save it. We do share the data with Google Analytics, of course, right? But we don't sell or share any customer data with third parties. So you can read about that in our privacy policy if you care to. Okay, cool. So let's jump into how this data flows from user actions all the way through SlideRule Analytics servers and things like that. So first thing that happens is user visits your site, right? So they come to your site in their browser. The SlideRule Analytics tracker that is installed on your Shopify store fires in their browser. So nothing's hit the servers yet. The first thing that it does is it fires a page view event to Google Analytics, right? The next thing that it does is it stores the client ID, the Google Analytics client ID, which we pull out of Google Analytics after loading it on your site. Google Analytics will load a client ID and a session ID in the G tag code. So we pull that out of the G tag code and we pull out the client ID and the session ID and we store it as a cart attribute on the Shopify cart. Cart attributes eventually, if a cart results in a purchase. So if a user, adds something to their cart and then creates a purchase, eventually those cart attributes will make it as a note attribute or additional details on the order. So you can see what those the data that we store on those cart attributes here. It's this SRA identifiers. We include the measurement ID, the client ID, and the session ID. Like I said, this client ID and session ID comes from Google Analytics. We need the client ID and the session ID to associate server-side events that we fire to Google Analytics with the client ID, the client-side events or the browser events, that the browser session that created those server-side events. So if this user that created, that came and fired a page view here, the user who visited the site, we want to know when we fire this purchase event after they make a purchase, we want to know things like, what sources of traffic they came from. Did they come from a Facebook ad or a Google ad or something like that, or Google organic? We want to associate that purchase event all the way back with the client-side session that created that event. So that's why we store the client ID and the session ID, is to be able to associate those events that we fire through Google Analytics 4's measurement protocol back with the original session that created the event. So that's why we're storing those events. Like I said, we store them as cart attributes on the Shopify cart, which eventually will become a note attribute or additional details on the order if the cart results in an order. We also store them as a backup in our cache directly. There's a number of reasons we do that. One is just the cart attributes don't always, depending on how the user flows through your site, the cart attributes don't always stick around on the cart. In particular, if you have dynamic checkouts or what's sometimes called one-click checkouts, we need to store the cart attributes, the client IDs in a cache, right? Directly, because sometimes we don't have access to the cart attributes. So with the SlideRule Analytics tracker, we'll store it on the cache, or we'll store it on the cart attributes, and then also store it in the cache, right? So this is the SlideRule Analytics cache. It stores the cart ID and the client ID there. Of course, we don't have any personally identifiable information yet. When the user first comes to the site, we don't know anything about them. We just know their client ID and their session ID. So that's still anonymous data. We do have an option to disable adding client IDs and session IDs to the cart attributes. So if you need that, let us know and we can get rid of that as well. But by default, it will store it in both places. Cool. That will cause a cart attribute. When we store the client ID and session ID on the cart attributes, that will cause Shopify to fire a cart update webhook. We do process that cart update webhook. We don't actually do anything with it for Google Analytics 4, but we do use it. We could use it to fire server-side events and things like that. But we do store the cart info, which again doesn't have any customer data on it. We do store that server side, so that way store it in our cache, so that way eventually we're looking to add things like abandoned cart events and things like that. We need to store the cart info there. So it does get stored, but we don't use that data, and it doesn't have any personally identifiable information on it. Okay, so the user goes through the website, does whatever they do, add things to the cart, remove things from cart. All of that takes place client side. There's no server side event associated with that. So no new data touches our servers after we add, the client ID and the server or session ID, like I discussed earlier. And so they go through all of the view items, add to carts, all of those things, remove from carts, they all fire client side. The first event that fires server side with SlideRule Analytics is when the user begins their checkout. So when that happens, Shopify fires a checkout create webhook, right? If you don't know what a webhook is just a way for Shopify to tell apps that something happened in the Shopify database. So the user starts their checkout, and checkout create webhook fires in Shopify. We process that webhook. When the user first gets to the checkout, of course, there's still no personally identifiable information because they haven't entered their email address or their shipping data or anything like that. So what happens is we create the Shopify fires the webhook event. We process that. Our server processes that create webhook event. We read the client ID from cart's attributes or the cache. So if it's in the cart attributes, we use that. If it's in the cache, we use that. And we fire the begin checkout event, right? That all flows through there. There's no personally identifiable information, and it results in a begin checkout event. Next, when the user adds their shipping info, so they actually add their email address, their shipping info, the first step of the Shopify checkout, when they do that, Shopify will fire a checkout update webhook. We process that checkout update webhook. Again, we read the client ID from either the cart attributes or the cache, and we fire an add shipping info event. At this point, this is the first point that SlideRule Analytics, or Shopify for that matter, has any personally identifiable information on the customer. Typically at this point, we have the email address, we have their phone number if they provide it, not required on checkout, on Shopify standard checkout. We have their name and we have their address, right? All the customer information does get stored in our server, which has a 7-day retention window. The reason why we store that data is we need it to process the webhooks. So we do need to store it for a certain amount of time just to give us time to process the webhook, right? We store it for a maximum of 7 days. Well, we always store it for 7 days. So that way, just for infrastructure reasons. If an event gets dropped, we can replay the event. If we need to debug something that happens, we can do so. We have 7 days to go look at all of the events that flow through our servers and make sure that the system is working correctly. We can refire events if we need to, if we dropped something. So that's why this information always gets stored for 7 days on the servers here. That's the data retention window. After that, it's deleted, and we don't use it for anything. We don't keep it around longer than that. Cool. Great. So as the user continues through the checkout, nothing happens PII wise, nothing interesting happens data wise. We do fire the recommended Google Analytics events after that. The only one is add payment info. So nothing happens until the user actually completes their purchase, right? The user will complete their purchase. Shopify will fire an order paid webhook, right? The way we process those order paid webhooks is the very first thing we do is we dump the order data and we store it in our cache again, right? So the cache has a data retention, the maximum data retention window is 14 days, but normally order data is deleted much quicker than that. So the order data does have customer data on it. It does have the email, phone, name, and address of the customer on it. So we store that in our cache. We wait 5 minutes for upsells. So we have lots of videos detailing how to handle upsells and things like that. But basically, the only way to handle it correctly is to fire events server side. And the way we do that is when the order is first paid, we wait 5 minutes. If additional order payments come in, we know that there was an upsell, and we add that to the eventual purchase event that we send to Google Analytics. So we wait 5 minutes. And then we process the order, whether or not events come in, whether or not an upsell is added to the order or not. After 5 minutes, we process the order, right? Again, we read the client ID from cart attributes or cache, right? We also read the order data that we stored in our cache, and we use that to generate the purchase event. We use this stored data so that way we can tell whether or not an upsell occurred. So whether or not we need to add new items to the order, things like that. Once we process that order, right, we remove the order data from the cache. So the customer data gets immediately removed from our cache as soon as the order is processed, right? So we do have a data retention window, a maximum of 14 days. That would only occur here if something broke, right? If there was something broke in processing the order and we didn't remove the data. Normally, under almost all circumstances, the vast majority of cases, unless there's a bug, we're going to delete this order data from our cache within 5 minutes. So, but the maximum retention window is 14 days. Okay, cool. And we fire the purchase event, and that's it. Okay, so just to summarize, where is customer data along this process? There is customer data stored on our servers. That is there for a maximum of 7 days, right? In fact, it is there for 7 days, not a maximum. It will be there for 7 days. We store it there for, like I said, infrastructure reasons. That's why that data is there. And then it is also stored in our cache. Usually the order data is stored in the cache for a maximum of, or usually for 5 minutes, but it can be a maximum of 14 days. All of this data, like I said at the beginning, none of it is shared with external partners or third parties. None of it is sold to anybody. It's all just used to process your data correctly and get the data sent over to Google Analytics, right? I do want to touch on one question that comes up often is if Google Analytics 4 doesn't take personally identifiable information, why do you need to request personally identifiable information from Shopify? The reason why is that Google Analytics does not send geo data with server-side events. So if you want to see by country, purchases by country, we can't send that data server-side. the way that you can client side. So we need to request address information, and that is personally identifiable information. Once you request customer data from Shopify, it gives you the full payload. So that's why we take that, right? And we add the, again, not personally identifiable information, but information like country, city, and zip code. We send that over to Google Analytics server side. Shopify considers that customer data. Once you request customer data from Shopify, you get the full thing. It is also possible in the future that we will be sending hashed email addresses. We'll have another video talking about the benefits of that to Google Analytics 4. Again, it's not PII when it's hashed. So if we hash it and send it to Google Analytics 4, it will be anonymized essentially, right? Not essentially, it will be anonymized. So that's something we're looking into too. So if that's the case, we'll update this video to talk about that. Okay, cool. Always feel free to read our privacy policy, reach out if you have any questions, check out our FAQs, and hope this clarifies how we use Google Analytics, how we use data, in particular customer analytics, customer data, to give you as accurate a picture as possible in Google Analytics 4. Thank you.